From a wrestler who improvised one of cinema's most quotable lines to a single stuntman playing nearly every alien in the film, John Carpenter's anti-Reagan sci-fi masterpiece hides bizarre production secrets behind its sunglasses-wearing hero. The film's famous fight scene was choreographed in a director's backyard, props were borrowed from Ghostbusters, and a homeless encampment was actually real. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about They Live. Fact 1. One-man army of aliens. When you watch They Live and see the various skeletal-faced aliens throughout the film, you might assume John Carpenter hired multiple actors to portray these otherworldly invaders. But here's the surprising truth. Nearly every alien with a speaking role or close-up shot was actually played by the same person. Jeff Imada, who also served as the film's stunt coordinator and fight choreographer, became Carpenter's go-to alien performer for a very practical reason. The production faced the challenge of creating convincing alien characters on a tight budget of just $3 million. While the filmmakers initially hired both male and female actors to don the elaborate skeletal makeup, Carpenter quickly discovered that Imada was uniquely suited for the job. His wiry build and slight frame meant he could fit into all the different alien costumes that had been created for the production, regardless of whether they were designed for male or female characters. According to a 1988 documentary about the making of the film, Imada was perfectly fine with playing the female alien characters because he could squeeze into those costumes as well. This practical solution allowed Carpenter to maintain consistency in the alien performances while keeping costs down. Imada's dual role as both the person who choreographed the film's action sequences and the main alien performer meant he had an intimate understanding of how these creatures should move and behave on screen. The arrangement worked so well that whenever viewers see an alien delivering dialogue or appearing in a close-up shot throughout They Live, they're likely watching Jeff Imada's performance beneath the elaborate makeup and prosthetics. This behind-the-scenes efficiency demonstrates how creative filmmaking can turn budget constraints into innovative solutions, with one versatile performer bringing an entire alien invasion to life. Fact 2. Ghostbusters equipment rental. Sharp-eyed viewers watching They Live might notice something familiar about the high-tech devices that aliens use to communicate with each other throughout the film. Those sleek, handheld gadgets that the skeletal invaders carry around are actually PKE meters, the same ghost-detecting equipment used by the Ghostbusters team in the 1984 blockbuster comedy. This wasn't some clever inside joke or intentional reference between the two films, but rather a practical solution born out of financial necessity. John Carpenter was working with an extremely tight budget of approximately $3 million for They Live, which meant the production team had to get creative when it came to sourcing props and equipment. Rather than spending money to design and build original alien communication devices from scratch, the filmmakers turned to prop rental houses that supplied equipment to various Hollywood productions. It was through this cost-saving approach that they discovered the PKE meters from Ghostbusters were available for rent. According to Carpenter himself, the film's low budget forced them to rent various items from prop houses, and that's exactly how they ended up with the Ghostbusters equipment. The PKE meters, originally designed to detect paranormal activity in the Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray comedy, were repurposed to serve as alien technology in Carpenter's dystopian thriller. The devices fit perfectly into the world of They Live, where advanced alien technology is hidden in plain sight among everyday objects. This creative recycling of props demonstrates how independent filmmakers often have to make the most of limited resources, turning one film's ghost hunting equipment into another movie's alien communication system. The PKE meters blend seamlessly into They Live's narrative, proving that sometimes the best special effects solutions come from simply knowing where to look for the right existing props. Fact 3. Roddy Piper's wrestling notebook. One of the most quotable lines in 80s cinema comes from a moment when Roddy Piper's character enters a bank filled with aliens and declares, "I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum." This badass one-liner has become so embedded in popular culture that even people who haven't seen They Live probably recognize it. But the line's origin story reveals something fascinating about Piper's creative process and his transition from professional wrestling to acting. The memorable quote wasn't written by John Carpenter or included in the original screenplay. Instead, it came directly from Piper's own collection of wrestling promotional material that he had been developing throughout his career in the ring. As a professional wrestler known as Rowdy Roddy Piper, he understood the importance of delivering memorable catchphrases and intimidating statements that would get crowds excited and establish his character's personality during interviews and promotional appearances. Piper kept a personal notebook filled with potential one-liners, verbal bits, and promotional catchphrases that he could use during wrestling interviews and matches. According to director John Carpenter, Piper shared this notebook with him during the filming process, and they both agreed that this particular line fit perfectly with his character's personality and the tone of the scene. The improvised nature of the line shows how Piper brought his wrestling experience and natural instinct for memorable dialogue to his acting performance. Interestingly, Piper later used this same line during an actual wrestling match, showing how the boundary between his film work and wrestling career remained fluid. The fact that one of cinema's most famous tough guy quotes originated from a wrestler's personal collection of promotional material demonstrates how Piper's athletic background contributed authentically to his memorable screen presence in They Live. Fact 4. Backyard fight choreography. The epic alley fight between Roddy Piper and Keith David in They Live runs for over 5 minutes and has become one of the most celebrated brawls in film history. But the location where this legendary sequence was created might surprise you. Instead of using a professional studio or elaborate rehearsal space, John Carpenter chose to design and choreograph the entire fight scene in his own backyard at his production office, turning his personal outdoor space into an impromptu training ground for what would become cinema gold. The fight scene was always intended to be longer than typical movie brawls, but the 3-week rehearsal process in Carpenter's backyard allowed Piper and David to develop something truly special. Working with fight coordinator Jeff Imada, the two actors practiced every punch, throw, and wrestling move on the grass behind Carpenter's office, using protective pads and going through each major beat of the sequence over and over until they could execute it flawlessly. The backyard setting provided a casual, comfortable environment where both actors could experiment with different approaches and really get to know each other's fighting styles. What makes this backyard rehearsal even more remarkable is that the original script called for the fight to last only about 20 seconds. However, Piper and David became so invested in the choreography during those 3 weeks of backyard practice that they developed a much more elaborate sequence. When Carpenter saw what they had created through their extended rehearsal process, he was so impressed with the intensity and authenticity of their work that he decided to keep the entire extended fight in the final film. The result is a brutally realistic encounter that feels genuine precisely because it was developed through weeks of careful preparation in the most humble of settings. Fact 5. Lovecraft pseudonym mystery. When you look at the credits for They Live, you'll notice that the screenplay is credited to someone named Frank Armitage rather than John Carpenter, but this mysterious writer doesn't actually exist. Carpenter chose to use this pseudonym for a very specific reason that reveals both his self-consciousness about taking too much credit and his deep appreciation for classic horror literature. By the time he made They Live in 1988, Carpenter had become known as a filmmaker who wore many hats on his productions, often serving simultaneously as director, writer, producer, and composer. This multi-talented approach had reached what Carpenter felt was an embarrassing peak with his 1983 film Christine, where his name appeared repeatedly throughout the credits. As he explained in a 2012 interview, seeing John Carpenter's Christine, directed by John Carpenter, music by John Carpenter, made him feel like he looked like an egotist who was trying to dominate every aspect of the production. To avoid this appearance of self-promotion, he decided to use a fake name for the screenplay credit on They Live. The choice of Frank Armitage wasn't random, but rather a tribute to one of Carpenter's favorite authors, H.P. Lovecraft. Henry Armitage is a character who appears in Lovecraft's famous story, The Dunwich Horror. And Carpenter selected this name simply because of his love for Lovecraft's work. The connection runs deeper than just admiration, as Carpenter has always felt a kinship with Lovecraft's themes about hidden worlds and unseen forces controlling reality from behind the scenes. Interestingly, Frank Armitage also became the name of Keith David's character in the film, creating a double layer of meaning that connects the screenplay's authorship to the story itself through this literary reference. Fact 6. Real homeless camp. The shantytown where Roddy Piper's character lives in They Live looks convincingly authentic because John Carpenter made the decision to film at an actual homeless encampment in Los Angeles rather than constructing an artificial set. This choice wasn't just about saving money on the film's tight budget, but also about bringing genuine realism to a story that critiques economic inequality and the treatment of society's most vulnerable people. The encampment served as both a filming location and a way to directly involve the community that the movie was partly representing. Rather than hiring professional actors to portray the homeless residents, Carpenter brought real homeless people into the production to play themselves and other characters throughout various scenes in the film. These individuals weren't just used as background extras, but were given actual speaking parts and meaningful roles within the story. What made this arrangement particularly notable was how Carpenter treated these non-professional actors with the same respect and care as his main cast members. Beyond paying the homeless participants for their work like any other actors, Carpenter also provided them with food during the filming process. According to Roddy Piper, who observed this firsthand, he thought Carpenter's approach was a pretty classy thing to do. This gesture demonstrated the director's commitment to treating everyone involved in the production fairly, regardless of their background or living situation. The arrangement created an authentic atmosphere on set that enhanced the film's social commentary about class divisions in American society. The decision to use a real homeless camp and include actual homeless people in the cast gave They Live a documentary-like quality in these scenes that would have been impossible to achieve with constructed sets and professional actors. This authentic approach reinforced the film's themes about economic disparity, while also providing real people with both income and a platform to be seen. Fact 7. Kurt Russell's near miss. The role of Nada in They Live was originally conceived with Kurt Russell in mind, but John Carpenter made a deliberate decision to cast someone else, despite Russell being his first choice for the character. This wasn't because of any problems between the director and actor, but rather because Carpenter had become concerned about appearing too dependent on Russell as his go-to leading man. By 1988, the two had already collaborated on 4 films together, creating a creative partnership that was becoming increasingly noticeable to both critics and audiences. Their working relationship had begun with Elvis in 1979, followed by Escape from New York in 1981, The Thing in 1982, and Big Trouble in Little China in 1986. Each of these films had showcased Russell in different types of roles, from a rock and roll legend to an action hero, to a paranoid scientist to a wisecracking truck driver. However, Carpenter started to worry that continuing to cast Russell in every major project would make him seem like he couldn't work with other actors, or that he was stuck in a creative rut. The decision to move away from Russell for They Live was entirely self-imposed by Carpenter, who wanted to prove that he could create compelling films with different leading men. Russell himself was actually unavailable anyway, as he was committed to filming Tequila Sunrise during the same period. This scheduling conflict made Carpenter's decision easier, but he had already been leaning toward trying something different for this particular project. Instead of Russell's polished movie star presence, Carpenter ultimately chose Roddy Piper, whose rough-around-the-edges authenticity and working-class background fit perfectly with the film's themes about economic inequality and blue-collar struggles. The choice proved that sometimes stepping away from a successful formula can lead to even more interesting creative results. Fact 8. Presidential election timing. They Live was originally scheduled to hit theaters on October 21, 1988, but Universal Pictures made a strategic decision to push the release date back 2 weeks to November 4th for reasons that went far beyond typical marketing considerations. This timing change served multiple purposes, with the most significant being that November 4th fell just 4 days before the 1988 presidential election on November 8th, when Americans would choose between Republican George Bush and Democrat Michael Dukakis. The release date adjustment was a calculated move to capitalize on the film's sharp political commentary about Reagan-era economics and conservative policies. John Carpenter had intentionally crafted They Live as what he called a primal scream against Reaganomics, using the alien invasion concept as a metaphor for how he believed wealthy elites were exploiting working-class Americans. By releasing the film so close to Election Day, the studio hoped to tap into political discussions and debates that would naturally be dominating the national conversation during that period. The timing strategy had an additional practical benefit, as the original October release date would have put They Live in direct competition with Halloween 4. The return of Michael Myers. Since Carpenter had created the original Halloween franchise, having his new film compete against a sequel to his own work would have been particularly awkward and potentially damaging to both movies' box office performance. The November 4th release date proved successful from a commercial standpoint, as They Live opened at #1 at the box office during its first weekend. However, the film's anti-establishment message didn't seem to influence the election results. As George Bush won decisively with 426 electoral votes, the irony wasn't lost on Carpenter, who later viewed the poor long-term box office performance as confirmation that his political message was ahead of its time. Fact 9. Roddy's stubborn wedding ring. Roddy Piper's commitment to his marriage created an interesting continuity issue in They Live that sharp-eyed viewers can still spot today. During filming, Piper flatly refused to remove his wedding ring, even though his character Nada is portrayed as a homeless drifter who carries everything he owns in a small bag and shows no signs of having family connections or romantic relationships. This personal decision by Piper meant that throughout several scenes in the film, you can clearly see a wedding band on his finger, creating a small but noticeable inconsistency with the character he was playing. Piper's refusal wasn't based on any practical concerns about losing the ring or difficulty removing it, but rather stemmed from his deep personal conviction about the symbolic importance of wearing his wedding band. As a married man who took his commitment to his wife seriously, Piper felt that taking off his wedding ring, even for the sake of a movie role, would be inappropriate and disrespectful to his marriage. This stance shows how Piper's real-life values sometimes took precedence over the technical requirements of filmmaking. The production team ultimately decided to work around Piper's decision rather than forcing the issue or trying to digitally remove the ring in post-production, which would have been expensive and technically challenging in 1988. John Carpenter and his crew simply accepted that some viewers might notice the wedding ring and chose to focus on other aspects of the performance rather than getting caught up in this minor detail. The visible wedding ring serves as an interesting reminder that actors bring their personal lives and values to their roles, sometimes in ways that create small contradictions with their characters. For Piper, maintaining his commitment to his marriage was more important than achieving perfect character consistency, a decision that reflects his priorities and personal integrity. Fact 10. No name game. Throughout the entire 94-minute runtime of They Live, no character ever speaks Roddy Piper's character's name out loud, even though he interacts with dozens of people and has extended conversations with his co-worker Frank and other characters. The only place where viewers can discover that his name is Nada is by watching the end credits, where he's listed as such in the cast listing. This deliberate choice by John Carpenter creates an interesting storytelling effect that reinforces the character's role as an anonymous everyman who could represent any working-class American struggling to get by. The name Nada carries significant symbolic weight, as it means nothing in Spanish, perfectly capturing the character's status as someone who has been forgotten and overlooked by society. This linguistic choice connects to the film's themes about how economic systems can make people feel invisible and worthless, reducing them to essentially nothing in the eyes of those in power. The fact that other characters never use his name emphasizes his isolation and the impersonal nature of his relationships. As he moves through the world without forming deep connections, the decision to keep the name unspoken also comes from the original source material, as the character was called George Nada in Ray Nelson's 1963 short story 8 O'Clock in the Morning. However, Carpenter chose to drop the first name entirely and never have anyone address the character by name, making him even more anonymous than in the original story. This approach allows viewers to project themselves onto the character more easily, since he represents a universal type rather than a specific individual. The namelessness also reflects the character's transient lifestyle as a drift. Fact 11. Supermarket set expense. Despite They Live's tight $3 million budget, the production team ended up spending their largest single chunk of money on building an entirely artificial supermarket set, which became necessary due to the technical challenges of creating the film's crucial subliminal message sequences. The supermarket scene is pivotal to the story, as it's where Roddy Piper's character first puts on the special sunglasses and discovers that everyday products are covered with hidden commands like obey, submit, and consume that are invisible to people without the glasses. Initially, John Carpenter and his crew attempted to film this important sequence in a real supermarket, thinking they could simply cover or replace the existing product labels with their own subliminal message versions. However, they quickly discovered that this approach was far more complicated than anticipated, as there were simply too many products, packages, and labels throughout the store to modify effectively. Every visible item in the supermarket needed to be addressed, from cereal boxes and canned goods to magazines and promotional displays, creating a logistical nightmare that would have required an enormous amount of time and manpower. The production team realized that trying to cover every single product in a real store would have been nearly impossible to execute properly within their budget and schedule constraints. According to Carpenter himself, the crew simply couldn't cover everything that would be visible in the camera shots, which would have created continuity problems and ruined the illusion that the entire consumer environment was saturated with subliminal messaging. Building a custom supermarket set allowed the production designers to control every element that would appear on camera, ensuring that all products displayed the appropriate subliminal messages when viewed through the special glasses. While this decision represented a significant expense for the low-budget production, it was essential for creating one of the film's most memorable and thematically important sequences. Fact 12. George Buckflower triple play. Character actor George Buckflower carved out a unique niche in Hollywood by specializing in homeless and vagrant characters, appearing as a street person in 3 notable films that showcased his ability to bring authenticity to these often overlooked roles. In They Live, he plays a drifter who lives in the homeless encampment where Roddy Piper's character stays, serving as one of the community members who helps establish the authentic atmosphere of the shantytown. His gruff appearance and natural ability to portray down-and-out characters made him perfect for these types of roles. Flower's most recognizable homeless character performance came in Back to the Future, where he played Red the Bum, in the street person who witnesses Marty McFly's dramatic return to 1985 in the DeLorean time machine and famously calls him a crazy drunk driver. This memorable cameo introduced Flower to mainstream audiences and demonstrated his talent for delivering memorable lines even in small roles. He reprised this character in Back to the Future Part 2, continuing the role in the alternate timeline sequences. John Carpenter became particularly fond of Flower's work and cast him in multiple films throughout the 1980s, including Escape from New York, where he once again portrayed a vagrant character. Carpenter appreciated Flower's authentic portrayal of society's outcasts and his professional approach to even the smallest roles. Beyond just his homeless characters, Flower appeared in several other Carpenter films including The Fog, Starman, Body Bags, and Village of the Damned, making him a regular member of the director's unofficial acting company. Flower's success in these roles came from his natural appearance and his respectful approach to portraying characters who are often marginalized or stereotyped in films. His consistent work across these 3 popular movies created an unusual career specialty that few other actors could match, making him Hollywood's most recognizable homeless character actor during the 80s. Fact 13. Real Punches fight scene. The brutal alley fight between Roddy Piper and Keith David in They Live looks incredibly realistic because the 2 actors were actually hitting each other throughout most of the sequence, creating genuine physical contact that translated into authentic-looking violence on screen. This wasn't a case of actors getting carried away in the moment, but rather a deliberate decision by both performers to make their confrontation as convincing as possible by using real punches and wrestling moves instead of relying entirely on movie magic and camera tricks. Piper and David agreed to pull their punches only when it came to strikes aimed at the face and groin, understanding that injuries to these areas could be particularly dangerous or could shut down production if either actor was seriously hurt. For everything else, including body shots, throws, and grappling moves, they committed to making actual physical contact with each other. Piper's background as a professional wrestler gave him the experience and technique to deliver convincing blows while minimizing the risk of serious injury, and he coached David on how to take hits safely. The physical toll of this approach was significant, as both actors ended up with real bruises and genuine exhaustion by the time they finished filming the extended sequence. Keith David later recalled the experience fondly in a documentary, describing it as good fun and noting that he never felt safer in any fight because Piper's professional wrestling background meant he knew exactly how to make the action look brutal while keeping both participants relatively safe. The commitment to physical realism paid off in the final product, as the fight scene has a raw, desperate quality that would have been difficult to achieve through traditional movie fighting techniques. The exhaustion and pain visible on both actors' faces during the later portions of the fight sequence is completely genuine, adding an extra layer of authenticity to one of cinema's most memorable brawls. Fact 14. Magical moving props. They Live contains numerous continuity errors that eagle-eyed viewers can spot throughout the film, creating moments where objects and props seem to magically change or repeat actions between different camera shots. These mistakes are typical of low-budget productions where reshooting scenes multiple times can lead to inconsistencies that editors either miss or decide to overlook in favor of keeping the best performances. The errors range from minor prop inconsistencies to more noticeable character actions that happen twice in the same sequence. One of the most obvious continuity problems occurs during the newsstand scene, where Roddy Piper first puts on the sunglasses and encounters an alien customer. The alien character receives his change from the vendor twice in consecutive shots, with the vendor even saying different things each time he hands over the money. In the first instance, he says, "Here's your change, sir," and in the second shot he delivers the line, "Here you are, sir. Thank you," creating a clear repetition that suggests the scene was filmed multiple times with slightly different dialogue. Another notable prop inconsistency involves Nada's revolver, which mysteriously changes color during the film. When he's sitting in a car during one scene, the gun appears to be chrome or silver-colored, but in later shots, the same weapon has transformed into a black revolver. This type of error typically happens when productions use multiple prop guns or when different takes are spliced together without careful attention to maintaining visual consistency. Additional continuity errors include Nada's belt going in and out of its loop during the famous fight scene, and his facial scars disappearing by the time he reaches the underground alien base. These mistakes demonstrate how the film's quick 8-week shooting schedule and limited budget made it difficult for the crew to maintain perfect continuity across all scenes, resulting in a collection of visual inconsistencies that have become part of the film's charm for dedicated fans. Fact 15. Meg Foster's hypnotic eyes. Meg Foster's casting as Holly Thompson in They Live was influenced significantly by her remarkably striking pale blue eyes, which had become both her most distinctive feature and occasionally a challenge throughout her acting career. Foster possessed such unusually intense and penetrating eyes that they often became the focal point of any scene she appeared in, sometimes overshadowing other elements of her performances or creating an unintended distraction for audiences and fellow actors. The uniqueness of Foster's eyes had been recognized by the entertainment industry years before They Live, with Mademoiselle magazine even dubbing them the eyes of 1979 during the height of her early career. However, this distinctive feature wasn't always considered an asset by directors and casting agents. Some filmmakers found her pale blue eyes so hypnotically striking that they actually required her to wear colored contact lenses to tone down their intensity and make them appear more ordinary for certain roles. John Carpenter, however, appreciated the otherworldly quality that Foster's natural eye color brought to her character in They Live. Her unusual appearance fit perfectly with the film's themes about hidden realities and things not being what they seem on the surface. The intensity of her gaze added an extra layer of mystery to Holly's character, making it easier for audiences to question her true motivations throughout the story. Interestingly, Foster herself never considered her eyes to be particularly distinctive, despite the attention they received from both the media and the film industry. This modest perspective contrasted sharply with how others perceived her most notable physical feature. Her natural eye color became part of what made her memorable in They Live, contributing to the film's gallery of unusual faces and helping to create the slightly unsettling atmosphere that Carpenter was seeking for his paranoid thriller about alien infiltration and hidden truths.